Imagine holding a box, not a treasure chest or a jewelry case, but a simple, antique wooden wine cabinet. Now, imagine that box isn't just wood and hinges. It's a cage, a prison for something ancient, something angry, something that whispers in the dark and brings with it a trail of sickness, misfortune, and pure, concentrated terror. This isn't fiction. This is the story of the Dybbuk Box, a real-life artifact so terrifying that it inspired a major Hollywood horror movie. From a simple estate sale to a string of owners whose lives were systematically destroyed, we're going to open the lid on the history, the curses, and the unsettling reality of the most haunted object in the world. Lock your doors, turn off the lights, and keep your hands tucked safely under your blanket, because this is the story of the box that refuses to stay shut. The year was 2001, and the setting was a small, unassuming estate sale in Portland, Oregon. Most people were there for the usual: old furniture, forgotten silverware, maybe a painting or two. But Kevin Mannis, a man with a keen eye for antiques and a nose for a unique story, found himself drawn to a single, small wooden wine cabinet. It was old, dark, and looked like it had been tucked away in an attic for a century. Kevin wasn't looking for a ghost story. He was looking for inventory for his vintage shop. The elderly woman who had owned the box, a Holocaust survivor, had recently passed away. Her granddaughter explained that her grandmother had always kept the box hidden away, claiming it contained a Dybbuk, a malicious, wandering spirit from Jewish folklore, and that it was never, ever to be opened. The granddaughter practically begged Kevin to take it off her hands, relieved to be rid of the unsettling object her family had feared for so long. Inside the box, Kevin found a few bizarre items: a dried rosebud, a small granite slab, a lock of hair bound with string, a small wine goblet, and two U.S. pennies from the 1920s. Strange, yes, but nothing immediately terrifying. He paid a measly $140 and brought the relic back to his workshop. He was excited about the box's history and the incredible story the granddaughter had told, thinking it would make a great conversation piece. The moment he placed the box in his shop, things changed. An inexplicable, sharp scent of cat urine and jasmine began to permeate the air. It was nauseating and refused to dissipate, no matter how much he cleaned or aired out the room. Then, Kevin started having the nightmares. They weren't just bad dreams. They were vivid, brutal experiences of being beaten by an unseen, ancient hag. He would wake up screaming, covered in sweat, sometimes with visible bruises on his skin. He initially dismissed it all as stress, but the real terror began when others were affected. Kevin's mother was the first to see it. He gifted her the box for her birthday, thinking the antique piece would delight her. Within moments of receiving it, she suffered a severe stroke. In the hospital, the only words she could manage to whisper were about the hate box and a chilling, shadowy figure. Kevin immediately took the box back. It was clear now, whatever the grandmother had feared, whatever she had kept locked away, was real. And Kevin Mannis was now its reluctant custodian. The simple antique purchase had quickly spiraled into a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Back in Kevin's apartment, the Dybbuk Box began to exert a darker, more direct influence. The bizarre nightmares intensified. Kevin's friends and colleagues who encountered the box started reporting similar, horrifying experiences. One friend, after holding the box for only a few minutes, was rushed to the emergency room with a severe, pulsating eye infection, his sight blurred by a strange swelling that doctors couldn't explain. Another friend, who was tasked with simply guarding the box while Kevin was out, ran out of the house in a panic, claiming he had seen a dark, shadowy figure standing over the relic. The most unnerving manifestation, however, was a persistent, aggressive plague of flies. Huge, black houseflies would appear out of nowhere, not just a few, but swarms of them, buzzing violently around the box. Kevin would kill them all, only for a fresh batch to materialize hours later. It was a biblical infestation in a modern apartment, and it terrified him. He found himself constantly sweeping up their decaying bodies, a gruesome, daily reminder of the object's corrupted energy. The box itself also started emitting strange odors and noises. Sometimes it smelled strongly of sweet decay, like rotting flowers and stale wine. Other times, the scent of jasmine and cat urine would return with a vengeance. But the noises were the worst. Kevin would hear soft, unsettling scratching sounds coming from inside the box, almost like tiny claws scraping against the wood. When he put his ear close, he could sometimes distinguish what sounded like faint whispering. Not a distinct language, but a cacophony of ancient, sorrowful sounds, like trapped voices begging for release, or maybe demanding to be let out. Kevin's relationship with the box changed from fascination to outright fear. He tried to sell it repeatedly, advertising it on eBay with a full and honest description of the bizarre and traumatic events surrounding it. He didn't want the money. He just wanted it gone, hoping that someone skeptical or brave enough would take it off his hands. The first few times he listed it, the listings were mysteriously corrupted, deleted, or simply vanished from the site. He was starting to feel like the box didn't just haunt him, but was actively fighting to stay with him. The constant tension, the lack of sleep, the recurring illness, and the feeling of being permanently watched began to take a toll. Kevin became withdrawn, paranoid, and sickly. The doctors could find nothing wrong, but his health was visibly failing. He was no longer just the owner of an antique. He was a hostage to a cursed object that was slowly but surely draining the life and sanity out of him. He knew he had to find a way to get rid of it, and soon, before the Dybbuk Box consumed him entirely. After multiple failed attempts to sell the Dybbuk Box, Kevin Mannis finally found a buyer, a college student in Missouri who, despite the terrifying stories in the eBay description, was mostly skeptical and intrigued. The student, who we'll call Iosif, was a young man fascinated by the paranormal but committed to a rational, scientific explanation for everything. He believed the stories were just great marketing, a brilliant way to drive up the price of a creepy antique. Iosif received the box and immediately started documenting his experience, intending to debunk the entire myth for a college project. He was confident. He opened the box, examined the bizarre contents, the hair, the stone, the pennies, and even drank wine from the small goblet, convinced that the curse was nothing more than suggestion and coincidence. For the first few days, nothing happened. He proudly told his friends he had defeated the notorious Dybbuk Box with logic and a bottle opener. His smug confidence didn't last. Soon, Iosif's roommates started complaining of the unbearable smell of cat urine and jasmine, a smell that followed the box from Portland. Then came the hair loss. Iosif and both of his roommates began to shed their hair in frightening clumps. They went from healthy young men to balding, sickly shadows in a matter of weeks. The doctor's diagnosis was mystifying: no underlying condition, no infection, just rapid, inexplicable alopecia. The physical decay was accompanied by mental anguish. Iosif began to suffer from the same vivid, violent nightmares that had plagued Kevin Mannis. He would wake up terrified, shouting about an old woman who was trying to kill him. His roommates, meanwhile, were seeing strange, fleeting shadows in their peripheral vision and experiencing objects moving inexplicably in their apartment. One evening, a television set in the living room shattered violently on its own, sending glass flying across the room, nearly injuring one of the students. Iosif's attempts to logically explain the phenomena crumbled as his health and sanity deteriorated. He realized that this wasn't a hoax or a psychological trick. He had invited a malevolent force into his home, and it was systematically destroying him and his friends. He finally understood the gravity of the antique he had so casually purchased. The scientific experiment had become a terrifying ordeal, and the confident college student was now desperate to be rid of the cursed object before it claimed more than just his hair. He listed the box back on eBay, his description now a frantic warning rather than a curious anecdote, hoping to pass the burden to someone else, anyone else, before the Dybbuk Box finished its dark work. The Dybbuk Box, now firmly established as a digital legend thanks to the repeated, harrowing eBay listings, eventually found its way into the hands of Jason Haxton, a medical museum director and university professor in Missouri. Haxton wasn't seeking the box. He was contacted by Iosif, the now terrified college student, who was desperate to find someone responsible to take the object. Iosif's life was a wreck, and he truly feared the box was going to kill him. Haxton, intrigued by the cultural and historical aspects of the artifact, agreed to acquire it, viewing it through an academic lens, a fascinating case study of folklore and mass hysteria. Haxton was different from the previous owners. He approached the box with respect and caution, not skepticism or greed. He saw it not just as a haunted object, but as a cultural item tied to a specific history, specifically the trauma of the Holocaust, which the original owner carried. He started an intense period of research, consulting with rabbis, paranormal investigators, and cultural historians to understand what exactly a Dybbuk was and what the box was designed to do. This research revealed something chilling. The box was a specific kind of sealing chest, and the contents, the pennies, the hair, the stone, were deliberately placed items used in a ritual to trap the entity. During his research, Haxton experienced his own early warnings. The box, still wrapped and sealed in his home office, began to affect his health. He developed a strange, persistent skin disease that made his hands swell and ache, and doctors were baffled, suggesting it was simply an allergic reaction to an unknown irritant. More disturbingly, he started coughing up blood, small, dark clots that appeared intermittently. His family, seeing the rapid decline in his health and the fear in his eyes, urged him to get rid of the object immediately. Haxton didn't just want to sell it. He wanted to understand how to contain it. He received a critical warning from a wise, elderly rabbi he consulted. The rabbi was firm. This was not a prank or a common ghost. This was a highly malevolent entity, and simply passing it on would only spread the curse. The rabbi warned Haxton that the box was feeding on its host's life force, and that the goal of the Dybbuk was not just to haunt, but to ultimately kill and possess. The warning cemented Haxton's conviction that the box needed to be dealt with permanently and properly, not just shuffled around like a hot potato. He realized he was no longer just a curator. He was a guardian in a spiritual war he hadn't asked to join. As Jason Haxton delved deeper into the history and nature of the Dybbuk Box, the entity's reach seemed to extend beyond the physical confines of wood and metal. Haxton decided that the world needed to be aware of this object, both for his own protection and as a historical record. He started documenting his experiences and research online, creating one of the earliest viral horror stories on the internet. He wrote detailed accounts of the previous owner's misfortunes, the strange physical symptoms, and the nightmares. This decision, however, seemed to infuriate the entity. The box began to fight back through the digital realm. Haxton's computer systems suffered massive, inexplicable crashes. Files related to the box would corrupt themselves instantly. His website, dedicated to detailing the box's history, was repeatedly hacked and taken down, often replaced with strange, indecipherable symbols and garbled text. It was as if the Dybbuk resented being exposed and was attempting to silence its chronicler. The curse didn't just affect Haxton's personal devices. The phenomena became global. People who read Haxton's online accounts or saw the photographs of the box reported having similar Dybbuk nightmares, seeing shadow figures, and experiencing the distinct, sickening smell of jasmine and cat urine in their own homes, thousands of miles away from Missouri. The box had become a digital contagion, its negative energy spreading through the very wires of the internet. Haxton noticed a disturbing pattern. Every time he tried to find a traditional or spiritual method to seal the box permanently, his research would be sabotaged. Books he ordered would arrive damaged or with the relevant pages torn out. Emails to experts would bounce back or disappear entirely. It felt like an intelligent force was anticipating his every move, protecting its prison and ensuring its continued ability to inflict misery. This raised a crucial question. If the Dybbuk was trapped in the box, how could it exert such powerful, widespread influence outside of it? Haxton theorized that the box was a portal, not just a prison, and the digital world offered the entity an unprecedented, global conduit for its malice. The professor was dealing with something far more advanced and adaptive than he had initially imagined, and the audience reading his story was now becoming part of the curse itself. The story of the Dybbuk Box, fueled by Jason Haxton's careful and credible documentation, became an unstoppable force in the world of internet horror. Its notoriety peaked when Hollywood came calling. Producers were captivated by the real-life account of the cursed object, the physical ailments, and the undeniable string of bad luck following its owners. The result was the 2012 major motion picture, The Possession, which loosely based its narrative on the horrifying events surrounding the box. The making of the movie itself was reportedly plagued by what many considered the Dybbuk's influence. The set experienced its own unusual, frightening incidents. Lights would explode without cause. vital props would vanish, and key pieces of equipment would malfunction repeatedly. At one point, a fire broke out on the set and destroyed the storage facility where the majority of the props were kept. Although the studio officially blamed electrical faults, the crew and cast whispered that the events were a direct response from the Dybbuk, angered by the commercialization and exposure of its spiritual prison. Haxton, while initially hoping the film would bring awareness, was wary of the potential danger. He refused to allow the actual Dybbuk box to be used on set, fearing that bringing it near thousands of people would be catastrophic. The filmmakers instead used a replica. Even so, the box's legend continued to grow, transforming from an obscure antique into a global icon of terror. Haxton realized that the film's popularity amplified the box's perceived power. Millions now knew its story, and the widespread belief and focus on the object might have inadvertently empowered the entity trapped inside. For Jason Haxton, the fame brought no comfort. The physical symptoms persisted: the coughing, the swelling, the chronic fatigue. He realized that the box's notoriety was a double-edged sword. While it cemented his place as the object's historian and protector, it also trapped him in a never-ending cycle of fear and illness. He was the one who had popularized the story, and now, he couldn't escape the responsibility of its containment. He knew he had to find a final, permanent solution, because the Dybbuk box wasn't just a movie prop. It was a hungry, ancient evil, and Hollywood had just given it an audience of millions to terrorize. Jason Haxton, now fully aware of the scale and danger of the Dybbuk box, transitioned from historian to unwilling keeper. His life revolved around managing the curse and trying to find a spiritual remedy. The physical symptoms he endured were a constant, painful reminder of the entity's presence. The coughing fits, sometimes bringing up blood, were worsening. He looked exhausted, years older than his true age, a victim of relentless, unseen spiritual stress. His family and close friends became increasingly worried, seeing their loved one wither away in the shadow of the cursed object. Haxton knew he couldn't keep the box indefinitely, and simply destroying it was out of the question. He learned from his consultation with various spiritual experts that attempting to destroy the vessel would only release the powerful and angry Dybbuk into the world without any restraints. The goal had to be a permanent, secure containment. He sought out experts in Jewish mysticism, specifically those knowledgeable in Kabbalah, hoping to find an ancient ritual that could truly neutralize the threat. One of the most persistent and disturbing phenomena Haxton experienced was the recurring, chilling smell of jasmine and cat urine. It wasn't just in the room with the box, it followed him. He would smell it while driving, while teaching a class, even when his home was meticulously clean. It was a sensory attack, a constant reminder that the entity was latched onto him, always present. This scent, he believed, was a psychological weapon, eroding his sanity and preventing him from finding peace or rest. His desperation reached a peak when the box began to affect his ability to work. As the director of a medical museum, his job required focus and clear thinking. But the Dybbuk's influence brought intense paranoia and brain fog. He started making simple, careless mistakes, a trait completely unlike the meticulous professor. He began to fear he might lose his job, which would only make his life, and the box's influence, worse. He realized he was in a race against time. Find a way to reseal the Dybbuk permanently before the entity completely wrecked his professional life, his health, and ultimately killed him. The simple wooden box had become a terrifying, ticking time bomb in his quiet academic life. After months of intensive, secretive research and communication with various experts, Jason Haxton finally gathered the necessary knowledge and materials for a resealing ritual. This was not something found in an ordinary book. It involved specific, precise steps derived from deep Kabbalistic tradition, tailored to contain a malevolent entity like a Dybbuk. He had to be incredibly discreet, fearing not only public outcry, but also the possibility of the Dybbuk interfering with the process. The ritual was complex, requiring specific items and conditions. First, the box itself had to be encased in gold leaf. This wasn't for decoration. In certain spiritual traditions, gold is a highly purifying and protective element, believed to amplify the containment spell. Haxton carefully applied the thin sheets of gold, a process he undertook with intense anxiety, as he could feel the temperature in the room drop and the air grow heavy as he worked. He felt a distinct, cold pressure pressing down on his chest throughout the process. Next came the external sealing. He needed a material that was strong and isolating. He chose to encase the entire gold-covered box in a custom-built ash wood container, a wood traditionally associated with warding off evil spirits. Crucially, he did not remove the original contents: the rosebud, the hair, the stone, the pennies, as these were vital components of the original spiritual lock. The final, and most critical, step was the physical lock. Haxton consulted with a spiritual advisor who provided him with a special, intricate lock imbued with specific spiritual symbolism. As he locked the ash wood container, he recited ancient Hebrew prayers of binding and protection, focusing all his energy on the intention of permanent containment. The moment the lock clicked shut, the heavy, noxious atmosphere in the room snapped. For the first time in months, the air felt clean, the strange smells vanished, and the oppressive silence was palpable. Haxton felt a profound, exhausting wave of relief wash over him, knowing that the most dangerous phase of his guardianship was temporarily over. He had managed to lock the nightmare away, but he knew this was just a pause in the terrifying saga. Even with the Dybbuk box securely encased in gold and then sealed within the heavy ash wood container, Jason Haxton knew his work wasn't finished. The box's previous owners had only passed it on, and Haxton had learned the hard way that the Dybbuk could still exert tremendous power even when seemingly sealed. To ensure the safety of his community and himself, he needed to hide it, making it inaccessible to anyone else, effectively ending its cycle of terror. Haxton made the decision for a secret burial. This was not a public or dramatic event, but a private, solemn, and intensely serious undertaking. He chose a location that was private, secure, and far away from any major population center, a place he felt would remain untouched for generations. He carried the heavy, sealed ash box, which now looked more like a small, mysterious sarcophagus than a wine cabinet, to the chosen spot under the cover of night. Before burying it, he took an additional precaution. He had learned that the Dybbuk could sometimes manipulate its surroundings to attract attention. To counteract this, he scattered various spiritual warding symbols and materials around the spot, traditional protective elements meant to confuse and deter spiritual entities. The final act was the burial itself. He dug a deep hole, placed the box inside, and covered it completely, meticulously erasing any sign that the ground had been disturbed. This act of final containment brought a strange mix of emotions. There was relief, certainly, that he was no longer daily exposed to the malignant force. But there was also a heavy sense of responsibility and secrecy. Haxton knew that he held a dangerous secret. A true, powerful haunted object was buried beneath the earth, and he was the only person who knew exactly where. He carried the burden of this knowledge alone, knowing that if the location were ever discovered, the cycle of horror would begin anew. He returned home, exhausted and scarred, but finally free of the Dybbuk's immediate physical presence. The keeper had fulfilled his sacred, terrifying duty. After the exhausting ritual and the secret burial, Jason Haxton finally experienced a period of relative peace. The chronic coughing stopped, the mysterious skin irritation on his hands began to clear up, and the pervasive, sickening smell of jasmine and cat urine finally vanished from his home. He started sleeping soundly again, free from the violent, ancient nightmares that had plagued him for months. It was a profound, life-altering relief, a quiet period of healing after a spiritual war. He returned to his normal life with cautious optimism. He was back at the museum, teaching his classes, and trying to catch up on all the time and energy the Dybbuk box had stolen from him. However, the experience had changed him fundamentally. He could no longer view the world through a purely academic or skeptical lens. He had faced a genuine, undeniable malevolent force, and that knowledge instilled a deep sense of caution and a profound respect for the unseen. He became fiercely protective of his privacy, knowing that the secret of the box's location was his most critical defense against future trouble. The internet, however, was not so easily quieted. Even though the box was buried, the legend lived on. Haxton's detailed accounts had created an online phenomenon, and people around the world were now obsessed with finding the artifact. He received constant emails and messages, some from well-meaning paranormal enthusiasts, others from deeply disturbed individuals, and some from people who claimed the Dybbuk was still affecting them. He had to spend significant energy managing the fallout, often having to debunk hoaxes or dissuade reckless individuals from trying to locate the sealed container. Haxton knew the piece was fragile. He understood that the Dybbuk was not destroyed, it was merely constrained. Its influence was like a pressure cooker. The spiritual lid was sealed, but the pressure was still building. He spent the calm months constantly researching ancient methods of strengthening the containment spell, fearful that any lapse in vigilance would give the entity the chance it needed to break free and resume its campaign of terror. The buried box was a quiet threat, a ticking clock hidden beneath the earth, and Haxton knew his role as the eternal keeper had just begun. While Jason Haxton maintained his silence and the box remained hidden, the legend of the Dybbuk Box continued to inspire new generations of horror enthusiasts and paranormal investigators. The story had gone global, spreading through documentaries, podcasts, and, of course, the movie. This widespread fame had an unexpected, terrifying consequence. It created a strange kind of spiritual echo. People who had never been near the physical box started reporting familiar symptoms. The sudden onset of strange, unexplainable eye irritations, chronic respiratory issues, and the disturbing, persistent nightmares of the ancient hag were popping up in forums and online groups dedicated to the box. Skeptics argued it was mass hysteria or the power of suggestion, but Haxton, having lived through the actual curse, recognized the pattern of the Dybbuk's signature influence. This raised a chilling possibility. Had the Dybbuk, once contained, managed to attach a piece of its malice to the story itself? Was the legend now acting as a new, immaterial vessel? Haxton theorized that the sheer volume of fear and belief directed toward the box, amplified by the internet, might be feeding the entity, allowing it to project minor curses or symptoms onto those who obsessively studied its story. The box might be buried, but its curse was now a digital virus, affecting the mental and physical health of its biggest fans. Haxton felt a crushing sense of responsibility. By documenting and popularizing the box's story, he had inadvertently given the Dybbuk a new, limitless reach. He even heard tales of people attempting to create their own Dybbuk boxes, copycat artifacts filled with seemingly cursed items, hoping to replicate the phenomena. While most of these were obvious fakes, the very act showed how deeply the narrative had embedded itself in the modern occult landscape. The professor realized that the battle wasn't just about securing a physical antique. It was about fighting an idea, a narrative, that was actively manifesting fear and sickness across the globe. He felt immense pressure to maintain the integrity of his secrecy, knowing that any slip could allow someone to unearth the true source of the terror. Years passed with the Dybbuk box remaining securely buried, but the mystery surrounding it deepened rather than faded. For Jason Haxton, the former owner and current keeper, some core questions about the entity and the artifact remained hauntingly unanswered. These questions fueled his continued, discreet research, making sure the lessons learned from his ordeal were never forgotten. One of the most unsettling questions centered on the box's origin and purpose. Who was the elderly Holocaust survivor, and what specific ritual did she or her family perform to trap such a powerful entity? The Dybbuk is traditionally a wandering soul seeking to possess a living body, but this box seemed designed not just for storage, but for a highly specific form of spiritual entrapment. Haxton never found the full, uncorrupted account of the family's history or the specifics of the ritual, leaving a gaping hole in his understanding of the entity's true nature. Another major question revolved around the contents. Why the dried rosebud, the two 1920s pennies, the small granite slab, and the lock of hair? These weren't random junk. Experts suggested they were integral components of the binding ritual. The rosebud representing a lost life or love, the hair a human anchor, the stone a piece of the earth, and the pennies payment for passage or silence. Yet, the exact meaning of the collection remains a mystery, suggesting a form of Jewish mysticism that is either lost or deliberately kept secret. Perhaps the most terrifying question was whether the Dybbuk was ever truly trapped. Given the entity's ability to inflict curses and project influence remotely, even while supposedly contained in the ash box, Haxton often wondered if the creature was simply resting, gathering strength, or merely playing a long game. was the peace he now enjoyed, simply the Dybbuk choosing to remain dormant, waiting for the perfect host or the right moment for a devastating escape. These lingering, philosophical doubts ensured that Haxton could never truly relax. The experience had taught him that sometimes the simple wooden box is far more complex and far more malevolent than any horror story could ever convey. Even in its sealed, buried state, the Dybbuk box continued to draw strange and obsessive figures. The vast online mythology created a whole new kind of threat for Jason Haxton, the dedicated paranormal enthusiast who believed they were uniquely qualified to save or study the cursed object. Haxton was continually harassed by people claiming to know the box's secret location, or, even worse, offering to pay exorbitant amounts of money to acquire it. One specific instance was particularly troubling. An unnamed, wealthy collector from Europe contacted Haxton repeatedly, claiming he had an ancestral link to the original Holocaust survivor who owned the box. This collector didn't sound like a regular horror fan. He sounded like someone who understood the true, dangerous power of the artifact and wanted it back for reasons Haxton couldn't fathom. The man offered Haxton several $1,000,000, an offer Haxton immediately and unequivocally rejected. The collector's persistence, however, sent chills down Haxton's spine. It suggested that there were powerful entities, not necessarily spiritual ones, who understood the box's value and would stop at nothing to possess it. This obsession also manifested in more dangerous ways. Haxton noticed strangers watching his house. Cars would drive slowly past his property, sometimes stopping briefly. He started taking different routes to work and changing his routines, becoming hypervigilant and paranoid, a necessary defense against the very real possibility of a break-in or kidnapping attempt aimed at extracting the box's location. The physical distance of the box offered no security against human greed and madness. Haxton understood that the fame he had created around the box was a perpetual threat. He had made the box too important, too valuable, and too notorious. He realized that the greatest danger to the Dybbuk box's containment might not be the spirit inside, but the humans outside. He doubled down on his secrecy, sharing the box's true location with absolutely no one, not even his closest family. He felt an intense, crushing loneliness, knowing that he would forever carry this terrifying burden, the sole protector of the world's most dangerous antique. While the worst of the Dybbuk's acute physical attacks subsided after the burial, Jason Haxton realized that the ordeal had left permanent scars, both physical and psychological. The mysterious skin condition, which doctors called chronic dermatitis, never fully went away. His hands, the hands that had touched the cursed wood and sealed the entity, still suffered periodic swelling and painful rashes, a constant, tangible reminder of the box's toxic presence. More profoundly, Haxton was left with lingering respiratory issues. The persistent coughing fits that had brought up blood disappeared, but his lungs never seemed to fully recover from whatever spiritual sickness the Dybbuk had inflicted. Doctors suspected chronic inflammation, but Haxton knew it was the residue of spiritual warfare, a sickness that medicine couldn't fully diagnose or cure. He was essentially living proof that the Dybbuk box had the power to inflict real, measurable damage on a living body. The psychological toll was perhaps the heaviest burden. Haxton lived with a low-grade, constant sense of paranoia. He checked locks, watched his back, and found it impossible to completely trust any stranger. The vivid, violent nightmares, although infrequent now, would occasionally return, bringing with them the unmistakable, nauseating smell of jasmine. He was forever changed, his innocence and skepticism permanently shattered. He had faced true evil and carried the emotional trauma of that encounter every day. Haxton often reflected on the initial owner, the elderly Holocaust survivor. She had lived with this terror for decades. He wondered how she had managed the burden for so long and realized that her passing was likely the only way she found release. He, too, felt tethered to the object, knowing that his life's purpose, for better or worse, was now irrevocably tied to the fate of the buried wooden wine cabinet. The box was sealed, but the curse was not broken. It had simply transferred from the wood to the memory, and the memory was etched forever into Jason Haxton's scarred body and mind. As years turned into a decade, Jason Haxton settled into his role as the eternal keeper of the Dybbuk box. The story continued to circulate, evolving into urban legend, always threatening to expose the box's resting place. Haxton's vigilance remained absolute. He devised elaborate contingency plans in case his location was ever compromised, including complex legal arrangements designed to prevent the exhumation or sale of the land where the box lay hidden. Haxton eventually realized that his entire relationship with the Dybbuk Box had been one long, desperate attempt to restore balance. The box, created from the trauma of the Holocaust, was a spiritual balm, and his mission was to ensure its silence. He understood that the true power of the Dybbuk lay in its ability to inspire fear, greed, and destruction in its owner. By refusing to open it, refusing to sell it, and ultimately, by burying it in silence, he had finally subdued its active terror. Today, the Dybbuk Box remains buried in a secret location, secured by layers of physical protection and spiritual binding. Jason Haxton continues to live a quiet life, occasionally sharing cautious updates, reminding the public that this is not a fictional story, but a warning. He is the last link to the physical object, the man who stared into the darkness and chose containment over curiosity. The ultimate lesson of the Dybbuk Box is not just about ghosts and curses, but about responsibility. It's a chilling reminder that some ancient evils are not meant to be understood or monetized, but simply contained and forgotten. And somewhere in the quiet, rolling landscape of Missouri, a small, unassuming wooden box waits silently beneath the earth, the prison holding a scream, and the world is safer only because one man chose to carry the terrifying secret alone. The long vigil continues, and the lid remains shut. And so, we close the lid on the terrifying story of the Dybbuk Box, a story of genuine curses, physical sickness, and a terrifying link between ancient folklore and modern media. From Kevin Manis's casual antique purchase to Jason Haxton's desperate burial, this artifact has left a trail of undeniable misery, proving that some forces are real, malevolent, and truly beyond our control. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? That a simple wooden box could hold the power to destroy lives, inspire a major Hollywood movie, and still be waiting silently beneath the earth, ready for the next person foolish enough to go searching. If you were Jason Haxton, would you ever be able to truly sleep peacefully, knowing that secret lies buried beneath your feet? Let us know what you would do in the comments below. If this story chilled you to the bone, please take a moment to like this video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most terrifying real-life horror stories. Thanks for listening, and until next time, lock your doors.